Maid secretly teaches Billionaire's autistic son to read. Until one day. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The mansion was silent that evening, its grand walls echoing only the hum of a distant clock. Outside, the air was cold, a sharp bite that seeped into every corner of the perfectly manicured lawn. Inside, the warmth of the fire barely touched the coldness in the heart of the house. Ava, the maid, moved quietly through the hallways, her footsteps nearly lost against the lush carpet. She passed the study, where the billionaire, Mr. Sinclair, sat alone, his back to her as he stared out the window. He was always like that, detached, distant, absorbed in his world of power and wealth. But tonight, something felt different. Ava's task was simple, though none knew of it. She was teaching the young boy, Michael, Mr. Sinclair's autistic son, how to read. Michael was an enigma in the household, often ignored and misunderstood by the family. He had few words, and those words were often scattered like broken glass, sharp and hard to understand. But with Ava, he was different. She saw the way his fingers traced the letters, the way his eyes lit up when he put together his first word. It was a secret she kept from the others, because she knew they would never approve. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't stop believing that she could help him. That night, as she quietly opened the door to Michael's room, she found him sitting on the floor, staring at the books she had left out for him. "Michael," she whispered, kneeling beside him. He didn't look up. But then, something shifted. Michael turned to her, his eyes wide. "Ava, teach me more," he said in a soft, hesitant voice. It was the first time he had ever spoken with such clarity. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had been patient with him, teaching him one word at a time, but this was different. This was more than a lesson. This was a breakthrough. But just as she was about to respond, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her. She froze, her hand still resting on the book in front of Michael. The door creaked open, and there stood Mr. Sinclair, watching them both. Ava's breath caught in her throat, but Michael didn't seem to notice. He was too busy, too focused on the word in front of him. "What's going on here?" Mr. Sinclair's voice was low, guarded. Ava stood up quickly, her hands trembling. She knew this moment was inevitable. She started, but her words faltered. She couldn't explain. Not to him. Not yet. Michael, as if sensing the tension, turned his head and smiled at his father, his eyes shining with something close to pride. "I can read, Daddy," he said. Mr. Sinclair looked at his son, then at Ava, his gaze hardening. "Is that so?" His voice was cold now, detached. Ava nodded, though her heart was racing. The room felt smaller suddenly, the space between them more palpable. "I've been teaching him," she said quietly. Mr. Sinclair didn't respond immediately. He stepped into the room, his presence overwhelming. "You're not authorized to do this," he said, his tone sharp. "You're just a maid." Ava's eyes flickered to the ground, but Michael's words stopped her. "She's not just a maid, Daddy. She's teaching me." The sincerity in Michael's voice hung in the air like a challenge. Mr. Sinclair paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the house seemed to hold its breath. Ava couldn't tell what he was thinking. Was he angry? Disappointed? Or was there something else? And then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. Mr. Sinclair turned away, walking towards the door. "We'll discuss this later," he muttered, his tone dismissive. Ava stayed still, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael looked at her, his small face filled with a kind of quiet hope. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, she knew one thing. She had made a difference in his life, and for that, she would never regret it. The next few days passed quietly, with Ava continuing her lessons with Michael in the secrecy of the house. She taught him how to recognize words, then form sentences, and before long, he began reading full paragraphs with surprising ease. Every time Michael learned something new, the sparkle in his eyes grew brighter. His world, once silent and distant, was slowly coming alive through the pages of books. Ava had never felt more proud, but also more nervous. She knew that each moment she spent teaching him was a step further into forbidden territory. Mr. Sinclair hadn't said much after that first confrontation, but she could see the coldness in his eyes whenever he looked at her. His silence was more frightening than any anger could have been. One evening, while Ava was preparing dinner in the kitchen, she overheard the sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat as the door to the kitchen creaked open. It was Mr. Sinclair. She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. He stood at the doorway, watching her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he broke the silence. "I know what you've been doing." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She turned toward him, trying to steady her voice. "Mr. Sinclair, I can explain." He raised a hand to stop her. "You don't need to explain," he said, his voice cold and distant. "I just want to know why." Ava felt the weight of his words press down on her. Why had she done it? Why had she risked everything to teach his son to read? She knew the answer, but it felt so simple, so obvious, that she wasn't sure how to say it. "Because he needed it," she replied quietly. "He needed someone to believe in him." Mr. Sinclair's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you think you're the one to give him that?" Ava stood her ground, not looking away. "I don't think I'm the one," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But I believe in him. I believe he can learn, and I believe he deserves the chance." There was a long pause as Mr. Sinclair stared at her, his face unreadable. Ava could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. She had expected him to shout, to fire her on the spot. But he didn't. Instead, he seemed to be considering her words. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was different, softer somehow. "I never asked for him to be like this," he said, more to himself than to her. "I never knew how to help him." Ava felt her heart soften. "You don't have to do it alone," she said gently. Mr. Sinclair's eyes flickered with something. Was it guilt? Regret? He looked away and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything. Nothing works." Ava took a small step closer, feeling the weight of his vulnerability. "Maybe it's not about fixing him," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Maybe it's about accepting him as he is, and helping him find his way in his own time." Mr. Sinclair looked back at her, his eyes searching hers. There was a long silence between them before he spoke again. "What if I can't do that?" he asked, his voice strained. Ava took another step toward him. "You don't have to do it alone," she repeated softly. "You have him, and he has you. That's a start." For a moment, there was no sound in the kitchen, just the two of them standing there, each processing the unspoken words between them. Finally, Mr. Sinclair exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. "I'm not sure what to do next," he said, his voice quieter now. Ava nodded. "You don't have to know everything right away," she said. "You just have to try, and you have to keep trying." Mr. Sinclair studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words, then finally nodded. "I'll try," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ava felt a sense of relief wash over her, a small victory in a long struggle. But even as she smiled, she knew this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, Mr. Sinclair seemed willing to face them. And for Michael, that was enough, for now. Days passed, and a quiet shift began to settle over the Sinclair household. Ava had noticed it in the way Michael had started looking at books more eagerly, the way he now tried to form words on his own, holding his pencil carefully, as if each letter was a step into a world he hadn't known existed. The once distant silence between them was slowly replaced with small exchanges, like the way he would look up at her, his eyes full of trust and anticipation. Ava couldn't help but feel proud, though the weight of her secret still weighed heavily on her. She had crossed a line, but it felt worth it to see Michael making progress. Mr. Sinclair, after their conversation in the kitchen, seemed to soften. He didn't question her as much, and there were moments when he would watch Michael with something close to affection, though he always seemed to retreat behind his walls again, as though unsure how to proceed. Ava kept her lessons quiet, aware that even the smallest slip of information could cost her everything. It wasn't easy. Every glance, every conversation felt like it was weighed down with an unspoken truth. The night Michael had read aloud to his father for the first time was still fresh in her mind, and though Mr. Sinclair hadn't expressed much in the moment, she knew something had shifted. It was the first step in a long journey, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as she continued to teach Michael, the question she'd been avoiding crept into her mind. What would happen if Mr. Sinclair found out she was teaching him to read without his approval? Ava's thoughts were interrupted one evening as she stood in the study, her hands shaking as she prepared the evening tea. She had become accustomed to the silence of the large house, the only sounds being the soft tick of the clock and the occasional murmur of the staff. But tonight, as she set the teapot on the tray, the door to the study opened. Mr. Sinclair entered. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark, but there was something different in the way he held himself. He wasn't angry. No, it was something else, something deeper, more conflicted. "Ava," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We need to talk." Ava froze, her heart beating faster in her chest. She could feel the weight of his words, the way they seemed to hang in the air between them, thick with unspoken questions. "About what, sir?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. Mr. Sinclair stepped closer, his gaze fixed on her. "About Michael." Ava's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the blood drain from her face, her hands going cold. She had been so careful, so quiet. How had he found out? "What about him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from betraying her nerves. "I've noticed the changes," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle now. "He's been reading. His behavior has improved. And I'm starting to see something in him that I hadn't before." Ava didn't know what to say. Was this it? Was this the moment when everything would come crashing down? But then Mr. Sinclair surprised her, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question was so simple, yet it carried so much weight. Ava lowered her gaze, her heart pounding. "I didn't think you'd approve," she admitted quietly. "I didn't want to overstep, but he was struggling so much, Mr. Sinclair. I couldn't stand to see him give up." There was a long pause as Mr. Sinclair processed her words. Ava watched him closely, unsure of what to expect. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, less guarded. "I never knew how to help him," he said, almost to himself. "I've been so focused on what he should be, what I thought he should be, that I never stopped to see him for who he really is." Ava felt a flicker of hope stir in her chest. Could this be the turning point? Could Mr. Sinclair actually see Michael, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person to be understood? "You've done more for him than I have," Mr. Sinclair continued, his gaze now meeting hers. "I've been so caught up in my own life that I missed what was right in front of me." Ava took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to understand. "I didn't want to betray you," she said softly. "I just wanted to help him." Mr. Sinclair nodded slowly, his eyes darkening with something that looked like regret. "You've done more than just help him. You've given him something I never could have." Ava felt a wave of emotion flood over her. "I just want him to be happy, Mr. Sinclair. I want him to have a chance." Mr. Sinclair paused, his expression thoughtful. Then, for the first time since she had started working for him, he smiled. Not a tight, forced smile, but a real one that reached his eyes. "Maybe it's time I stopped trying to do everything alone," he said quietly. Ava's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the beginning of something new, something she hadn't dared to hope for? She looked at him, uncertain but hopeful. "What do we do now?" she asked. Mr. Sinclair met her gaze, and, for the first time, there was a softness in his eyes. "Now, we help Michael together," he said. "And we start by making sure he knows he's loved, no matter what." Ava smiled, a small, quiet smile, but it was enough. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long began to lift, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change for the better. The weeks that followed were filled with new routines, and for the first time, the Sinclair household felt less like a mansion and more like a home. Ava continued to teach Michael in secret, but now she wasn't the only one invested in his future. Mr. Sinclair had begun showing up unexpectedly, sitting in the background, quietly observing as Ava worked with Michael. Sometimes, he would ask questions about the letters and the words, as though testing the waters of this new world Michael was entering. It was a slow process, but Michael's progress was undeniable. He started to speak more clearly, stringing together longer sentences. He would sit in the evenings with Ava, reading books aloud, sometimes stumbling over words, but always trying. It was the best gift he could have received, someone who believed in him, truly believed in him. Ava knew that this wasn't just about reading. It was about giving him a voice. But there was something Ava hadn't expected, something she wasn't prepared for. Mr. Sinclair's presence became more than just occasional. He began to ask about other aspects of Michael's life, his hobbies, his interests, his fears. Slowly, over dinners that used to be filled with silence, conversations began to grow between father and son. And as those conversations flourished, Ava couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. It wasn't just about Michael anymore. There were days when Mr. Sinclair would look at her differently, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. She couldn't tell if it was gratitude, curiosity, or something else entirely, but it was there. She tried not to read too much into it. She was here to help Michael, and that was enough. But as the days turned into weeks, she found herself struggling to balance the line between the teacher she had become to Michael and the woman she had been before. One afternoon, as Ava was helping Michael sound out a new word, Mr. Sinclair entered the room. He didn't announce himself, but simply stood in the doorway, watching them. Michael, oblivious to his father's presence, read the word aloud, the syllables carefully pieced together. When he finished, Mr. Sinclair stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "You've done something incredible with him, Ava." His words caught her off guard. She had grown used to his silence, the way he kept his thoughts behind his eyes. But now, there was something softer in his tone. "I never thought he could do this," he continued, looking at Michael, then back at Ava. "You've helped him in ways I couldn't." Ava stood up, her hands instinctively brushing the dust off her clothes. She wasn't sure how to respond. "I just wanted to help him," she said quietly, her gaze falling to the floor. He deserved a chance to be heard. There was a long pause, and then Mr. Sinclair spoke again, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I think I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said. Ava's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time he had expressed some form of gratitude, but the sincerity in his voice now felt different. "No, you don't owe me anything," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm just glad to see him thrive." Mr. Sinclair didn't say anything else for a moment. He just stood there, watching Michael as he turned the page in his book, completely engrossed in the story. Finally, he spoke again, this time more decisively. "I want to do more," he said. Ava's head snapped up, her eyes meeting his. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice unsure. "I want to make sure Michael has everything he needs. I want to invest in his future the way you've invested in him," Mr. Sinclair said, his gaze unwavering. There was something in his words, a determination that caught Ava off guard. "You've shown me what I've been missing," he continued. "And I want to make sure he never feels like he's not enough. He's more than enough." Ava didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time protecting her secret, hiding the lessons from everyone, afraid of what might happen if they were ever discovered. But now, with Mr. Sinclair's words hanging in the air, she couldn't help but feel a shift. This wasn't just about teaching Michael anymore. This was about building a future for him. And for that future, they needed to work together. Michael looked up from his book, his eyes meeting his father's. There was a flicker of recognition in those eyes, something Ava hadn't seen before. Mr. Sinclair smiled, and for the first time, it felt real. "I've been so focused on what I thought was important," he said softly, almost to himself. "But I realize now that the most important thing is right in front of me." Ava could feel the weight of his words settle in the room. For the first time, she saw Mr. Sinclair not as the distant billionaire, but as a father, someone who wanted to be present, someone who wanted to do better. She smiled, a quiet smile, but it was enough. This was the beginning of something new, something they would build together. Ava didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. She felt that Michael, and maybe even Mr. Sinclair, would finally have the future they deserved. The days that followed felt like a dream to Ava, but the pressure of her secret weighed heavily on her. Michael's progress continued, and for the first time, she saw him as a bright, curious child who had been hidden away by his father's expectations. Mr. Sinclair, though still distant at times, seemed to be making an effort, spending more time with Michael, listening to him, talking to him. The mansion, which once echoed with loneliness, now seemed full of life, the air heavy with unspoken possibilities. But Ava knew that despite the changes, they were treading a delicate path. She was still the maid, and Michael was still the son of the billionaire. Their worlds could only overlap so much before the divide would become too much to cross. She kept her lessons with Michael quiet, doing her best to avoid drawing attention to the fact that she was the one who had been teaching him to read, even though Mr. Sinclair had offered his support. But she couldn't help but wonder how long that support would last. One evening, as she was sitting with Michael, helping him sound out another word, there was a knock at the door. Ava looked up, startled, as Mr. Sinclair entered the room, his face tense. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his eyes flicking to Michael, who was sitting on the floor, engrossed in his book. Ava's heart skipped a beat. "Ava," Mr. Sinclair finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "We need to talk." Ava stood up slowly, her stomach tightening. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. They stepped into the hallway, away from Michael's watchful eyes, and Mr. Sinclair closed the door behind them. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice firm, but with a note of something else. Ava swallowed, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. Mr. Sinclair sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his eyes searching hers. "I've been watching Michael, and I see the difference. I know you've been working with him." Ava felt a jolt of panic. She had been so careful, but now it felt as though everything was about to unravel. She opened her mouth to speak, but Mr. Sinclair raised a hand to stop her. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not angry. I'm not going to fire you." Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. "Then, what do you want, sir?" He looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I want to know how you've done it," he said quietly. "How did you get him to read? How did you break through to him?" Ava blinked, unsure of how to respond. She had never expected him to ask, much less to show this much interest. "It wasn't easy," she said, her voice soft. "It took time, patience, and trust. Michael needed to know that someone believed in him, that he wasn't just a problem to be fixed." Mr. Sinclair nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you believed in him?" he asked, his voice low. Ava hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," she said firmly. "I did." Mr. Sinclair looked away, his eyes focused on something in the distance. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I never believed in him," he said. Quietly. "I thought that if I could fix everything around him, he would be fixed too. But I see now. I see what you've done. I see what he's capable of." Ava's heart swelled with something she couldn't quite name. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Mr. Sinclair to actually acknowledge what she had done, to see the changes in Michael. She had thought for so long that her work would be unnoticed, that she would always be the maid, just a quiet part of the background. But now, here he was, acknowledging her, seeing her. "You've done more than I ever could," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so caught up in my own life, my own failures, that I didn't even see my own son." Ava felt a pang in her chest. She could hear the pain in his voice, the regret, and for a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. He had been so distant, so closed off, that she had never imagined he could feel anything for Michael. "It's not too late," she said softly. "You can still be there for him. He's not lost, not by any means." Mr. Sinclair looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers with a sense of understanding she hadn't expected. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm going to try. I promise you I will." Ava nodded, a sense of quiet relief settling over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like they were all on the same side. She had been teaching Michael, yes, but now it seemed that she was helping to teach his father as well. It wasn't just about reading anymore. It was about opening hearts, about allowing them all to see each other, truly see each other. "Thank you," Mr. Sinclair said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava smiled, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. "You're welcome," she said softly. But even as she spoke the words, she knew there was still so much more to be done. Michael was learning, yes, but the real journey was only just beginning. And this time, she wasn't alone. As the days went by, the transformation in Michael was undeniable. He was no longer the quiet, withdrawn child who shied away from everything. Now, he walked with more confidence, his steps measured, his eyes sharper, and his smile came more easily. Ava could see it in his face. He was proud of himself. But she also noticed the subtle changes in Mr. Sinclair. The man who had once seemed so distant, so cold, was starting to let his guard down. He would spend more time in the same room as Michael, asking him about his day, listening to him read, even showing signs of affection. Ava had never seen him so engaged with his son, and though it was strange, it was also heartening. But with these changes came a new set of challenges. Ava could feel the eyes of the other staff members on her, the whispers behind closed doors. She was still the maid, after all, and her relationship with Michael, though innocent, was beginning to raise eyebrows. Even though Mr. Sinclair hadn't said anything to her directly, Ava knew the dynamic was shifting. It was only a matter of time before someone else noticed what was happening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky a deep orange, Ava found herself in the garden, tending to the small patch of flowers she had been planting for the past few weeks. It was her quiet escape, a moment of peace amidst the storm of emotions that constantly swirled around her. As she knelt, pulling weeds from the soil, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see Mr. Sinclair approaching, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, looking down at her. "You're doing well with him," he said quietly, his voice thoughtful. Ava stood up, brushing the dirt from her hands. "Thank you, sir," she replied. There was a pause, and then Mr. Sinclair took a step closer. "I never realized how much he needed someone," he said, his words slow, as if weighing them carefully. "Someone to believe in him, to see him." Ava looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. She had always seen him as the strong, silent type, too focused on business to notice the small details of his son's life. But now, in this quiet garden, he seemed almost human. "I know I've missed a lot," Mr. Sinclair continued, his gaze turning toward Michael, who was playing near the fountain. "But I want to be there for him now. I want to be a father, not just a provider." Ava felt a pang in her chest. She had never imagined Mr. Sinclair would come to this realization. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't everything Michael needed, but it was a start. "It's not easy," Ava said softly, "but you're doing the right thing." Mr. Sinclair nodded, his eyes fixed on his son. "I want to do more," he said. "I want to make sure he has everything he needs. I want to be involved." Ava smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't expected. "It's a good start," she said, "but you have to keep showing up, even when it's hard." He turned to her, his expression firming. "I will. I promise." For the first time in a long while, Ava believed him. The conversation shifted as Michael ran toward them, excited to show his father the progress he had made in his reading. Mr. Sinclair's face softened as he bent down to listen to his son. Ava stepped back, giving them space. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The road ahead would be difficult, no doubt. There would still be hurdles to overcome, moments of doubt and fear. But for now, in this moment, things were different. Things were better. As the weeks passed, Mr. Sinclair kept his word. He spent more time with Michael, engaged with him in a way Ava had never seen. He took him on walks around the estate, read books with him, and even began to ask Ava for advice on how to help Michael with his schoolwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And Ava knew that sometimes, progress was all they could ask for. But there were still challenges. As the relationship between Michael and his father grew, Ava could feel the growing tension among the staff. Whispers turned into open curiosity, and one evening, as she was cleaning the hallway, she overheard a conversation between two of the other housekeepers. "Have you seen the way Mr. Sinclair's been looking at her?" one of them said, her voice low. "It's like he's softening." "I heard they're spending a lot of time together," the other replied. "I don't know if that's appropriate. She's just the maid, after all." Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been so careful to keep her distance, to keep everything between her and Michael above board. But now, the growing scrutiny from the staff felt suffocating. She had never wanted this attention, and she feared what might happen if Mr. Sinclair's new behavior became public knowledge. One evening, as the staff gathered for dinner, the tension in the air was palpable. Ava sat at the far end of the table, her eyes on her plate, but she could feel the eyes of the others on her. Mr. Sinclair was at the head of the table, talking to his business partner, but he kept glancing over at her, and for the first time, she felt a shift in the air. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. There was something more. The moment dragged on, and Ava's anxiety grew. She had never felt so out of place in this house, so exposed. Finally, after dinner, Mr. Sinclair asked her to meet him in his study. Ava walked slowly, her mind racing, her heart pounding. She entered the room to find him standing by the window, looking out over the estate. He turned as she entered, his expression serious. "Ava," he said, his voice steady. "We need to talk." She nodded, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. The moment she had feared. I've noticed the tension, he continued, his gaze fixed on her. The way things are changing around here. The way people are looking at you. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I never meant for things to get complicated. Mr. Sinclair shook his head. You don't need to apologize, he said. But I want you to know something. You've done more for my son than anyone else ever has. And I'm not going to let anyone make you feel less than that. Ava blinked, surprised. What are you saying? She asked, her voice quiet. Mr. Sinclair stepped toward her, his gaze unwavering. I'm saying that if anyone has a problem with you, they'll have a problem with me. You're part of this family now, Ava. And I'm going to make sure you know that. Ava's heart raced as his words sank in. For the first time, she felt a true sense of belonging in this house. Not just as the maid, but as someone who mattered. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Mr. Sinclair smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made her believe that, just maybe, things were finally starting to change for the better. The days that followed felt like a new chapter for everyone in the Sinclair household. Michael was thriving, his progress in reading and communication showing daily improvements. Mr. Sinclair had fully embraced his role as a father, and his presence with his son had become more consistent. They spent time together in ways Ava had never imagined possible. They read books, played games, and slowly began to form the connection that had been missing for so long. But as Ava continued her quiet support for Michael, the other staff members in the house began to notice the growing bond between father and son. The whispers that had once been hidden in the corners of the house were now becoming harder to ignore. Ava had noticed it in their glances, their questions that were never asked aloud. She could feel their scrutiny, and it made her uneasy. She had always kept her distance from the family's affairs, but now, it seemed like her presence was starting to draw more attention. One afternoon, as Ava was walking down the hallway, she overheard two of the housekeepers talking in the kitchen. She tried not to listen, but their conversation was impossible to ignore. Did you notice how much time Mr. Sinclair's been spending with that boy? One of them asked. I've never seen him this involved before. I heard they've been spending time together outside of the usual stuff. The other replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think he's actually starting to care? Ava quickly walked away, her stomach churning. She couldn't let herself be distracted by the gossip, but the weight of their words lingered in her mind. She had known the moment would come, the moment when her quiet relationship with Michael would be noticed. It was only a matter of time before the truth of what she was doing would be exposed. Later that evening, after dinner, Ava found herself standing in front of the large windows that overlooked the estate. The sun had just set, casting a golden glow across the lawn. She had been lost in thought when she heard footsteps approaching. She turned to see Mr. Sinclair walking toward her, his face serious, but his eyes were not the usual cold, distant gaze. There was something softer there now. Ava, he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of concern. We need to talk. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She knew this conversation was coming, but she had hoped it wouldn't happen so soon. Of course, sir, she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety that crept up inside her. They stepped into the study, and Mr. Sinclair closed the door behind them. Ava stood by the desk, waiting for him to speak. There's been talk among the staff, he said, his voice low. People are starting to notice the change with Michael, with the time we're spending together. Ava's breath caught in her throat. She had known it would come to this, but hearing it out loud made her stomach tighten. I'm sorry, sir, she said quickly. I never meant for it to become a problem. Mr. Sinclair shook his head, his expression softening. It's not a problem, Ava, he said. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm glad to see him making progress. But I want to be clear, there's a lot of attention on this, and I don't want things to get complicated for you. For both of us. Ava felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had feared that Mr. Sinclair would reprimand her, or even fire her for getting too involved. But instead, he was acknowledging the truth of the situation. I understand, she said, her voice quiet. I've always tried to keep things professional. I never wanted to overstep. Mr. Sinclair nodded, but there was a thoughtful look in his eyes. You've done more for Michael than anyone else has, he said. I'm not going to pretend that this hasn't changed things. But I want to make sure you're comfortable, Ava. I don't want you to feel like you're being watched or scrutinized. Ava nodded, but the weight of his words lingered in the air. Thank you, sir, she said softly. I just want what's best for him. Mr. Sinclair stepped closer, his voice lowering. And that's what I want too, he said. But we're going to have to be careful. The staff will be watching, and they might not understand. I don't want anyone to think that we're doing anything inappropriate. Ava's heart tightened in her chest. She had never thought about it that way before. She had always focused on Michael, on helping him learn and grow, but now she realized that her actions could be perceived differently by others. I'll be careful, she said quietly. I never meant to make anyone uncomfortable. Mr. Sinclair studied her for a moment, then nodded. I know you didn't, he said. And I appreciate everything you've done. But we need to be mindful of how things are perceived. Not just for Michael's sake, but for yours as well. Ava felt the weight of his words, and for a moment, the quiet tension in the room felt unbearable. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but she knew that whatever happened, she couldn't back down now. She had to continue helping Michael, even if it meant facing the scrutiny of others. I understand, sir, she said, her voice steady. Mr. Sinclair gave her a small, appreciative nod. Good, he said. We're in this together, Ava. I won't let anyone make you feel less than you are. And I'll make sure Michael has every chance to succeed. Ava felt a flicker of hope stir within her. She had never imagined Mr. Sinclair would be this supportive, this understanding. For the first time, she felt like they were truly on the same team, fighting for Michael's future. As she left the study that night, the weight of the conversation still heavy on her shoulders, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The road ahead would still be difficult. There would be challenges, and there would be moments of doubt. But at least now, she knew she wasn't facing them alone. The weeks following the conversation in the study seemed to bring new clarity to everyone in the Sinclair household. Michael was flourishing in ways Ava had not imagined possible. His reading improved dramatically, and with Mr. Sinclair actively involved, Michael's world expanded each day. The once quiet, isolated child now found himself spending more time with his father, who was showing him things he had never taken the time to show before. They would go on walks around the estate, talking about anything and everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, Michael felt seen. Ava had continued her quiet support, but now it felt different. Mr. Sinclair's attention to his son was undeniable. There was a tenderness in the way he encouraged Michael, a shift in his demeanor that made Ava feel both hopeful and apprehensive. She had known from the start that her role in Michael's life was always meant to be temporary. She had come into this household as a servant, with little more than the desire to help. But now, as she watched the two of them, father and son, forming bonds that had been missing for years, she wondered what her place would be in the long run. One evening, after a long day of lessons with Michael, Ava found herself standing in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She felt a growing sense of unease, the kind of feeling you get when you sense that something is about to change. It wasn't until Mr. Sinclair entered the room, his expression serious, that she realized what was coming. Ava, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of concern. We need to talk. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and nodded. Of course, sir. They both sat at the small kitchen table, the soft light from the overhead lamp casting a gentle glow over their faces. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happening, Mr. Sinclair began. About you, about Michael, about what I've been doing wrong all these years. Ava looked at him, her heart heavy. She had hoped that they could continue on this path, but now she wasn't sure what he was going to say. What do you mean? She asked quietly. Mr. Sinclair leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. I'm not blind, Ava. I see what's happening. I see how close you've become with Michael. I see how much you've helped him. But I also see how things are starting to feel uncomfortable. Ava felt a tightness in her chest. Uncomfortable, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The staff. They've started talking. I know what's been said. Ava's heart sank. She had feared this moment for weeks, but now that it had come, she didn't know how to respond. I've always tried to keep things professional, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I never meant for anything to become complicated. Mr. Sinclair shook his head, his expression softening. I know, Ava, and I'm not blaming you. You've done more for my son than I ever could have. You've given him something I never thought he needed. Ava looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was heading. But she asked, her voice barely a whisper. But, Mr. Sinclair continued, I think we need to be careful. For your sake, for mine, and for Michael's. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but I don't want things to become too personal. Ava's heart tightened in her chest. She had never wanted anything more than to help Michael, to give him the love and care he deserved. But now, she wasn't sure where she stood. She had always known her position in the household was temporary. She was just the maid, after all. I understand, she said, her voice barely audible. Mr. Sinclair studied her for a moment before speaking again. I'm not going to push you out, Ava, but I want you to understand that things are changing. I want to make sure we don't lose what we've worked so hard to build. Ava felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't the dismissal she had feared. It wasn't the end. I just want what's best for him, she said quietly, her voice steady now. Mr. Sinclair smiled, though it was small and weary. I know you do. And so do I. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling over them. Ava felt a deep sense of gratitude for what had been achieved, but there was still so much uncertainty ahead. Thank you for understanding, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. I just don't want things to be difficult. I know, he said softly. But we'll figure it out, Ava. Together. Ava nodded, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. For the first time, she felt like they were truly on the same side. The next few days were filled with subtle changes. Mr. Sinclair began to spend more time with Michael, engaging with him in ways that were more than just practical. They played together, they laughed together, and slowly, it seemed that Michael was becoming more and more comfortable with the idea of having a father who truly saw him. But there was still a lingering uncertainty in the air. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that her presence in their lives was still too precarious, that her role as the maid would always be a reminder of the line between them. As Michael's progress continued, the house grew quieter, more peaceful. Ava watched from the sidelines, knowing that she had done everything she could for Michael. But as the days turned into weeks, she couldn't help but wonder, would things really change? Or was this just a brief moment of connection in a world where the divide between them could never truly disappear? The days continued to pass, and the changes in the Sinclair household were undeniable. Michael's confidence grew, his ability to read and express himself improving each day. There were moments when he would approach Ava, excited to show her the progress he had made, his face glowing with pride. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment every time he achieved something new, knowing that it was all because of the work they had done together. Mr. Sinclair continued to show more involvement in his son's life, taking him out for walks around the estate, encouraging him to engage with the world around him, and spending more time reading with him. The connection between father and son had deepened, and though it wasn't perfect, it was growing stronger. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Despite all the changes, despite the growing bond between Michael and his father, there were moments when the weight of their positions became painfully clear. She was still the maid, and they were still the wealthy family she served. The divide between them remained, an invisible wall that no amount of progress could erase. One evening, as Ava was helping Michael with his reading, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Mr. Sinclair standing in the doorway, watching them. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his eyes focused on his son. Michael was so engrossed in his book that he didn't notice his father. After a few moments, Mr. Sinclair stepped into the room. Ava, he said, his voice steady but with a hint of something deeper beneath the surface. Can we talk? Ava felt a sense of unease settle in her stomach. She had been expecting this conversation for some time now, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Of course, sir, she said quietly. They walked out into the hallway, away from Michael's curious gaze. Mr. Sinclair glanced at her, his face unreadable. You've done something incredible with Michael, he began. I see it in him now. The change, the spark. He's opening up, and it's because of you. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected this kind of praise from Mr. Sinclair. She had done what she believed was right for Michael, but hearing him acknowledge it so openly was overwhelming. I just did what he needed, she said softly. I didn't want him to be lost anymore. He deserves more than what he was given. Mr. Sinclair nodded, his expression softening. I know, he said. I can see that now, and I've been thinking a lot about how to make things right between us. Ava looked at him, unsure of where this conversation was heading. What do you mean, sir? She asked. Mr. Sinclair ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with something. I've realized something, he said, his voice quieter now. I've spent so much of my life focused on success, on business, on building this empire. I never thought about what I was missing in my own family. I didn't realize what was truly important until it was almost too late. Ava stood still, absorbing his words. She had always seen Mr. Sinclair as a distant, driven man, someone who didn't care about much beyond his wealth and success. But now, hearing him speak so vulnerably, she saw a side of him she had never expected. I know I've failed Michael, he continued, his voice thick with regret. I've failed him as a father, and I've failed you too. I never saw you for what you truly are, a person who cares, who believes in my son when I didn't. And I owe you more than I can ever repay. Ava's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She had never expected to hear these words from him, and yet, they felt bittersweet. She had come into this house as just a maid, with no expectation of ever being anything more. But now, standing here with Mr. Sinclair, she realized just how much had changed. You don't owe me anything, she said quietly. I just wanted to help him. That's all. Mr. Sinclair stepped closer, his eyes locked onto hers. No, Ava, he said firmly. I owe you more than you know. You've given me something I can never repay. And you've given Michael something I didn't even know he needed, a chance to have a father who truly sees him. Ava looked away, feeling the weight of his words. She had never wanted anything for herself, just to help Michael. But now, in this moment, she realized that what she had given him was far more than just a chance to read. It was a chance to be understood, to be accepted, to be loved. Mr. Sinclair took another step forward, his voice quieter now. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said. For Michael, for us. And I want to make sure that you're not just a part of this household because of your position, but because you're someone who belongs here. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had never imagined that she might be a permanent part of this family, that her place in their lives could be anything more than temporary. I don't know what the future holds, Mr. Sinclair continued, but I want you to know that I see you. I see what you've done for Michael, and I want to do whatever it takes to make things right. Ava could barely breathe as his words sunk in. She had spent so much time focused on helping Michael that she had never considered what this might mean for her. I'm not asking for anything, she said, her voice trembling. I just want him to be okay. That's all. Mr. Sinclair nodded, his expression resolute. Then that's all we'll focus on. Making sure Michael is okay. And making sure you know that you're part of this family now, too. Ava blinked, surprised by the shift in his words. Part of the family? It was a concept she hadn't dared to consider. But now, with his words hanging in the air, she felt a strange sense of hope, of possibility. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't guaranteed. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a maid, not just a teacher. She was someone who mattered. And for Michael, that was all that mattered. As the conversation ended, Mr. Sinclair gave her a small, meaningful nod, and Ava left the room with a sense of quiet relief. Things were far from perfect, but they were moving in the right direction. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the future was bright. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the Sinclair household began to shift even more. The change was subtle at first, like a ripple across still water, but it was undeniable. Michael had become more engaged with his father, showing signs of progress that Ava had hoped for but never dared to expect. Mr. Sinclair was there more often, asking questions, taking time to talk with Michael, and for the first time in his life, Michael was truly seen. But the pressure on Ava remained. Even with Mr. Sinclair's promises and support, the world outside their small bubble continued to cast judgment on their relationship. The staff had become more curious, their whispers less discreet, and Ava couldn't help but feel the weight of their eyes on her whenever she passed by. But despite that, she pressed on. For Michael, it was worth it. It had to be. One afternoon, as Ava was walking through the hallway to check on Michael, she overheard two of the staff members talking quietly in the kitchen. Their conversation, though low, was impossible to ignore. Did you see how much time Mr. Sinclair has been spending with that boy? One of them asked. It's almost like he's a different person now. I heard she's been the one teaching him. Can you believe that? A maid, teaching the boss's son to read. The other replied with a low laugh. Ava froze in the doorway, her heart sinking. It wasn't the first time she had overheard similar conversations, but today it felt different. The judgment in their words was sharper, more pointed. Ava could feel her cheeks flush with discomfort. But before she could leave, Mr. Sinclair's voice rang out from behind her, startling her. Ava. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I need to talk to you. Ava nodded and followed him down the hall to his office, her mind racing. As they entered the room, Mr. Sinclair motioned for her to sit. He sat behind the desk, his eyes fixed on her. There's been talk, he began, his voice calm, but his tone firm. About you. About what's been going on with Michael. Ava's heart pounded in her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but she wasn't prepared for it to come so suddenly. I know you're doing what you think is best, Mr. Sinclair continued, but we need to address the situation. Ava swallowed hard. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, she said, her voice steady despite the nerves that bubbled beneath the surface. I just wanted to help Michael. I thought it was the right thing to do. Mr. Sinclair sighed, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. I know, Ava, he said softly, and I'm not angry with you. I'm not upset about the lessons. It's just, he paused, as though searching for the right words. It's complicated. This isn't just about Michael anymore. It's about how the world will see us, how they'll see you. Ava felt a lump form in her throat. I didn't want to be seen, she said quietly. I just wanted to help him learn, to give him a chance. Mr. Sinclair's gaze softened, but there was still a seriousness in his eyes. And you've done more than that, he said, his voice low. You've given him something I never could, belief. I've been so caught up in everything else, I never realized how much he needed someone who cared. Someone who wasn't just doing their job, but truly seeing him. Ava's heart fluttered at his words. She had never imagined that Mr. Sinclair, the man who had been so distant for so long, could express such understanding. I never meant for things to get complicated, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But now, it feels like it's too much. Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his expression thoughtful. It's not too much, Ava, he said, his tone reassuring. But we do need to be careful. The staff, the world outside this house, they won't understand. They'll make assumptions. We need to protect what we've started here. Ava nodded, her heart heavy with the reality of the situation. She had never considered what it might mean for her to become so involved in Michael's life. The consequences were more complicated than she had imagined. But she couldn't stop now. She had already come too far. I understand, she said quietly. But I can't just walk away from him now. He needs me. Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his eyes softening once again. I'm not asking you to walk away. But we need to approach this carefully. For your sake, and for Michael's. We can't risk it all falling apart. Ava took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice resolute. Mr. Sinclair nodded, the weight of the conversation settling between them. I'll make sure everything stays in order, he said. I'll protect both of you, and I'll make sure no one questions what we've done. Ava felt a flicker of relief at his words. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was a step forward. Thank you, she said softly. Mr. Sinclair smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Thank you for what you've done for my son, Ava. You've given him a chance to have a future, and I will make sure he has that. As she left the study, Ava's heart felt heavy with the weight of what had just been said. She had expected this moment, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure what would happen next. The road ahead would be challenging. But one thing was clear. No matter what happened, she was no longer just a maid in this house. She was a part of something much bigger. And that, in itself, was a victory. The next few days were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Michael continued to make progress, his world opening up in ways that Ava had always dreamed of. Mr. Sinclair's involvement remained steady, and despite the tension from the staff and the growing scrutiny, Ava held on to the hope that their work together would be enough to protect Michael's future. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, Ava felt like she was truly part of the Sinclair family, not just as an employee, but as someone who belonged. The days turned into weeks, and despite the growing bond between Michael and Mr. Sinclair, things were far from perfect. The tension in the household remained, with staff members eyeing Ava more than ever, gossiping behind closed doors. Ava did her best to stay focused on her work and keep the lessons with Michael going. But every moment with him felt heavier now, as if the weight of their secret was pulling them both down. Michael continued to thrive. He was reading more confidently, and his conversations with his father had become less awkward and more natural. Mr. Sinclair was becoming the father Michael had always needed, and although Ava was happy for both of them, the fear of being discovered still loomed over her like a dark cloud. One evening, after a long day of lessons, Ava was walking through the hallway when she heard Mr. Sinclair's voice coming from the library. She stopped and listened for a moment, unsure of whether she should interrupt. The sound of Michael's laughter followed, a light, joyful sound that warmed her heart. She couldn't help but smile at the sound. But then she heard something else, something that made her heart skip a beat. "I'm not sure what to do, Michael," Mr. Sinclair's voice said, softer now, as though he was speaking to his son in a way he had never done before. "I want to make sure you have everything you need. I want you to be happy, but things aren't as simple as I hoped." Ava's smile faltered, and she slowly approached the door, unsure of what to do. She wanted to stay out of it, wanted to give them their space. But something inside her told her that she needed to hear what was being said. "What do you mean, Dad?" Michael's voice asked, his tone cautious but filled with curiosity. I don't want to make things harder for you," Mr. Sinclair said. "You've already had to deal with so much, and I'm just starting to realize how much I've missed." Ava stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of whether she should intervene. She didn't want to intrude, but she also knew that the truth would eventually come out. "It's not your fault, Dad," Michael said. "You're here now. That's what matters." Ava's heart ached at Michael's words. She had never heard him speak so directly, so open. It was as if the bond between them had strengthened beyond her expectations. Mr. Sinclair's voice softened. "I'm trying, Michael. I just hope I'm not too late." Ava slowly stepped away from the door, her heart heavy with the weight of their conversation. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she felt a deep sense of sadness and guilt. She knew that her presence in their lives would eventually become a problem. She was just the maid, after all. A part of her wanted to step away and let them have the space they needed, but she couldn't. She couldn't walk away from Michael. Not now, not when he needed her the most. The next day, after the conversation in the library, Mr. Sinclair seemed more distant than usual. He still spent time with Michael, but his mood had shifted. He was quieter, more withdrawn. Ava could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between his duty as a father and his responsibilities as a businessman. She tried to stay out of the way, but she couldn't help but notice the tension building between them. The staff had become bolder in their whispers, and Ava could feel their eyes on her more than ever. It was as if they were waiting for something to happen, for the truth to come out. And Ava knew that it was only a matter of time before it would. One evening, Mr. Sinclair called Ava into his office. She hesitated for a moment before walking in, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the uncertainty made her nervous. "Ava," Mr. Sinclair said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to you." He motioned for her to sit across from him. "I've been thinking about what's best for Michael," he continued, "and I've realized that I need to make some changes. I want him to have the best future possible, but I can't do it alone." Ava nodded, her breath catching in her throat. She knew where this conversation was heading. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice soft. Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his gaze filled with uncertainty. "I need you to help me. I need you to stay, to continue working with him. But there are going to be some changes. I can't have anyone questioning what we're doing here. I need to protect this, protect you, protect him." Ava felt a weight settle in her chest. She had known that things would get complicated, but hearing Mr. Sinclair admit it made everything feel real. "I understand," she said quietly, "but I don't want to make things harder for you, for Michael." Mr. Sinclair shook his head. "You're not the problem, Ava," he said, his voice sincere. "You've done more for Michael than anyone else ever has. But there are other people involved, people who won't understand. I need to make sure no one stands in the way of what we've built." Ava's heart sank. She didn't want to be the reason that Michael's progress was hindered, but she also didn't want to be the one to expose their secret. She had always known her place in the household, and now, it seemed like the walls were closing in. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her heart. Mr. Sinclair took a deep breath and looked at her with a new sense of resolve. "I need you to stay close to Michael," he said. "I need you to keep teaching him, to help him continue to grow. But I also need you to be discreet. We can't let anyone else know what's going on." Ava nodded, her stomach churning. She knew that this was the only option, the only way forward. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, and the consequences of their secret would weigh heavily on all of them. I'll do what I can, she said quietly. But we can't keep hiding forever. Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. I know, he said. But for now, we have to. For Michael's sake. As Ava left the office, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were starting to unravel. The weight of the secret they were keeping was becoming heavier, and she didn't know how much longer they could keep it hidden. But one thing was clear, she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when Michael still needed her. The days after the conversation in Mr. Sinclair's office were filled with an undercurrent of uncertainty. Ava knew that their secret couldn't remain hidden forever, but she couldn't shake the sense of relief that had come with Mr. Sinclair's words. Despite the challenges, things were moving in the right direction. Michael continued to make remarkable progress. His reading was better than ever, and he was speaking more confidently, his once-hidden thoughts now flowing with ease. But there was a quiet weight in the house that Ava couldn't ignore. The tension, though subtle, was always present. The staff was still whispering, their glances lingering longer than they should. Ava couldn't help but feel as though the world around her was slowly closing in. It wasn't just about her relationship with Michael anymore. It was about the precarious position she found herself in. She had always been the maid, always been on the outside looking in, but now, with the growing bond between her and Michael, the lines were becoming blurred. One afternoon, as she was preparing lunch in the kitchen, she overheard one of the staff members talking to another. The conversation was hushed, but Ava could hear the words clearly. She's still teaching him, you know. That maid, teaching the boss's son like he's her own. I heard she's been spending all her time with him, helping him read. It's not right, the other replied. Ava's heart sank. She had known the gossip would continue, but hearing it so plainly made it feel real. She knew that it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was judgment. She had been careful, so careful to keep her role in Michael's life a secret. But now, it seemed that even the walls of the house couldn't shield her from the scrutiny. She took a deep breath and continued her work, trying to block out the whispers that echoed in her mind. That evening, as Ava was finishing her shift, Mr. Sinclair called her into his study. Her stomach churned with anticipation. She wasn't sure what this meeting would bring, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. When she entered, Mr. Sinclair was sitting at his desk, his eyes focused on the papers in front of him. He looked up as she entered and motioned for her to sit. Ava, he said, his voice heavy. I've been hearing things. About you. About your role with Michael. Ava's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't say anything, just nodded. The staff has been talking, he continued. And I've noticed the way things are starting to change around here. The way they look at you. Ava looked down, her hands clenched in her lap. She had always known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to say. I don't want things to become more difficult for you, Mr. Sinclair said, his voice softer now. I know you're doing this for Michael, and I appreciate that more than you know. But we need to be careful. Things are starting to get out of hand. Ava swallowed, trying to steady her nerves. I understand, she said quietly. I never meant to cause trouble. I just wanted to help him. Mr. Sinclair leaned forward, his expression serious. I know, Ava, he said, his voice steady. But we can't afford to be careless. Not with Michael's future, and not with yours. Ava's heart dropped at his words. She had feared this day would come, the day when the risks she had taken would finally catch up with her. She had never expected to be at the center of the storm, never expected to become a part of the family's drama. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mr. Sinclair paused, his eyes searching hers. I'm not going to ask you to stop helping Michael, he said, his voice firm. But we need to make sure that what's happening here doesn't get out. The staff is already talking, and I don't want this to become a scandal. You and I both know how quickly things can spiral out of control. Ava nodded, her mind racing. I understand, she said, though she wasn't sure she did. She had never considered how much of a risk she was taking, how much was at stake. But now, with the weight of Mr. Sinclair's words hanging in the air, she realized that her place in this household was far more precarious than she had ever imagined. I'm not trying to make your life harder, Mr. Sinclair continued. I just want to make sure Michael has the best possible future, and we need to do that without attracting attention. Ava stood up, her hands trembling. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice steady despite the fear that was building inside her. Mr. Sinclair nodded, but there was something in his eyes that told Ava this wouldn't be the last time they'd have this conversation. Good, he said softly. I just want you to know that you're a part of this family, Ava. You've done more for Michael than anyone else ever has. But now, we have to be careful about how we move forward. Ava left the study feeling a mixture of relief and dread. The path ahead was unclear, and she wasn't sure what the future would bring. But one thing was certain, she couldn't stop now. Michael still needed her. And no matter what happened, she would continue to fight for him. The road would be difficult, but she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had made a promise to herself and to Michael to help him, no matter the cost. And she would keep that promise, even if it meant facing the consequences of the choices she had made. Weeks had passed since Mr. Sinclair's meeting with Ava, and while the tension between them had eased somewhat, the growing scrutiny from the staff never let up. Ava had been careful to keep things quiet, to maintain the delicate balance between her role as Michael's teacher and her place in the Sinclair household. But as she watched Michael continue to thrive, she couldn't ignore the weight of the situation. She had never imagined that her quiet life as a maid would lead her to this point, where her actions were being questioned, where her relationship with the Sinclair family was becoming increasingly complicated. Michael, on the other hand, was a different person. He was more confident, more outgoing, and his relationship with his father had blossomed into something Ava had only hoped for. It was in those moments, when she saw Michael's eyes light up with excitement over a new word or a new discovery, that she knew she had made the right choice. But even as Michael grew, the house was filled with a quiet tension. There were still those whispers, still the sidelong glances from the other staff. Ava had always been aware of the boundaries between her and the Sinclair family, but now, with Michael's progress and the growing bond between her and Mr. Sinclair, those boundaries felt increasingly fragile. It was on one such evening, as Ava sat in the library helping Michael with his reading, that the tension finally reached its breaking point. Mr. Sinclair had been away on business for the past few days, but as he returned that evening, there was an unmistakable change in his demeanor. He looked tired, stressed, and when he walked into the library, his eyes immediately locked onto Ava and Michael. Michael was sitting on the floor, engrossed in a book, while Ava sat beside him, helping him with a particularly difficult word. It was a moment of quiet, a moment that had become so familiar, so comfortable. But now, it felt different. The air in the room had shifted, and Ava could feel the weight of Mr. Sinclair's gaze on them. Michael looked up at his father, a small smile crossing his face. "Dad, look, I can read this all by myself," he said, his voice full of pride. Mr. Sinclair's lips twitched into a small smile, but Ava could see the tension in his shoulders. "That's great, Michael," he said, but his voice lacked the warmth it usually carried. He turned to Ava. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice cool, almost distant. Ava's heart sank. She had been expecting this moment, but now that it had arrived, she wasn't sure how to respond. "Of course," she said quietly. They left the library and walked down the hallway, away from Michael's eager eyes. Once they were alone in the study, Mr. Sinclair turned to her, his expression hard. "I've heard the whispers, Ava," he said, his voice low. "I know what's been going on in this house." Ava's stomach dropped. She had feared this moment, the moment when the truth would come to light, when everything she had worked for would unravel. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to help Michael. He needed someone who cared." Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his eyes hardening. "I know you've done a lot for him," he said, "but this has gone too far." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. She thought he would understand, that he would see what she had done for his son. But now, with his words, everything felt like it was slipping away. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You've crossed a line, Ava," Mr. Sinclair said, his tone sharp. "I can't have my staff thinking that you're crossing boundaries with my son. This isn't appropriate. You're his maid, not his mother." Ava felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. She had never wanted to overstep, never wanted to be anything more than what she was, a teacher to Michael, someone who cared. But now, it seemed like everything she had done had been for nothing. "I never meant for it to be this way," she said, her voice breaking. "I only wanted to help him." Mr. Sinclair's expression softened slightly, but his words were firm. "I know you think you're helping, but you're making this harder than it needs to be. You need to step back. I'll take it from here." Ava felt a sharp pang in her chest. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice quiet. "You're just going to send me away?" Mr. Sinclair's eyes flickered with something, but he didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath before speaking again. "It's not that simple, Ava," he said, his voice heavy. "You've done more for Michael than anyone else. But you're not his mother. And I need to protect him. I need to protect this family." Ava stared at him, her heart breaking. She had never imagined it would come to this, that her place in their lives would be so fleeting. She had fought for Michael, for his future, but now it seemed like it had all been in vain. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. "I'll go." Mr. Sinclair's expression softened, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Ava turned and walked out of the study, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know where to go from here, didn't know what the future held. But she knew one thing for sure. She had done everything she could for Michael, and if she had to leave, at least she could walk away knowing that she had given him the one thing he had always needed, someone who cared. As she left the mansion that night, her thoughts were clouded with sadness and regret. She had given everything for Michael, and now, it seemed, it was over. But deep down, she knew that whatever happened, Michael would be okay. He had a father who cared, and that was all that mattered. The days after that conversation in Mr. Sinclair's office felt like a lifetime to Ava. She had tried to keep her composure, to focus on her work, but the weight of Mr. Sinclair's words pressed down on her like a constant reminder of her place in the household. She had been so sure of her role, so confident in the path she had chosen for Michael, but now everything seemed uncertain. She had given everything for Michael, her time, her care, her belief in him, and now, it felt like it was slipping away. Despite everything, Michael's progress continued. He was growing stronger, more confident, his once quiet voice now filling the halls with laughter and excitement as he shared his latest achievements. Ava found herself watching him more closely than ever, her heart swelling with pride, knowing that she had helped him become the boy he was today. But even as she watched him, a part of her felt like an outsider. She had helped Michael in ways that no one else had. But it seemed like she was now being pushed out of the very life she had worked so hard to build with him. It wasn't just about the staff anymore, about their whispers and their judgments. It was about Mr. Sinclair, about the fact that he had made a choice. He had chosen to keep things quiet, to protect his family, but in doing so, he had distanced himself from Ava. She felt it in every conversation, in every glance. She was no longer a part of the family, not really. She was just the maid again. One evening, after a long day, Ava was in her room, sitting by the window, looking out at the sprawling estate. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, and she couldn't help but think about everything that had happened. She had tried so hard, had given so much of herself, but now she wasn't sure if it had been enough. The sound of a knock on her door broke her thoughts. She quickly stood, trying to shake off the heaviness in her chest. When she opened the door, she found Mr. Sinclair standing there, his expression unreadable. "Ava," he said, his voice soft. "We need to talk." Her heart skipped a beat. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to feel. "Of course, sir," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. They walked down the hallway, away from the staff and the watchful eyes of the household. When they entered the study, Mr. Sinclair closed the door behind them and turned to face her. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just stared at her with a mixture of regret and something else, something softer. "I've been thinking about everything," he said finally, his voice low. "About what's been happening between us, between you and Michael. And I've realized that I've made a mistake." Ava's heart clenched. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Sinclair ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with the words. "I've been so focused on what people would think, on protecting my reputation, that I lost sight of what really matters," he said. "I pushed you away, Ava. I pushed you away when all you've ever done is care for my son, care for our family." Ava stood still, trying to process his words. She had never expected him to admit this, never thought he would acknowledge the hurt he had caused her. "I'm sorry," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't belong, for making you feel like you were nothing more than just a maid. You're more than that, Ava. You've always been more than that." Ava's throat tightened, and she struggled to find her voice. "I never wanted anything more," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help Michael. I just wanted to see him happy." Mr. Sinclair stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "I know," he said softly. And that's why I need to make this right. I need to stop pretending that we're not a family. You've done more for Michael than anyone else could have. And I don't want to lose you in his life. I don't want you to feel like you have to walk away. Ava felt a tear slip down her cheek, a mix of relief and sadness. She had spent so many days feeling like an outsider, feeling like she wasn't enough, and now Mr. Sinclair was telling her that she was. I don't know what to do anymore, he said, his voice quieter now. But I know that I can't let this be the end. I want you to stay, to continue helping Michael, to be a part of his life, to be a part of this family. Ava's heart swelled at his words, but she was still uncertain. I don't want to cause any more problems, she said softly. I just want to do what's best for him. Mr. Sinclair nodded, his gaze filled with determination. You've done that already, he said. And I'll make sure no one questions your place here again. You're a part of this family, Ava, and I want you to stay. For the first time in weeks, Ava felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and there would still be challenges ahead, but she knew now that she wasn't alone. Mr. Sinclair was making the choice to see her, to see what she had done for Michael, and to make sure that their work together wasn't forgotten. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Mr. Sinclair smiled. A small, sincere smile. No, thank you, he said, for everything you've done for us. As Ava left the study, a sense of relief washed over her. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly part of something, part of a family that had once seemed so far out of reach. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least she knew she wasn't walking it alone. The weeks that followed felt like a whirlwind for Ava. The tension in the household remained, but there was also a strange sense of stability. Michael continued to thrive under the care and attention of his father, and Mr. Sinclair seemed more present than he ever had been before. Their bond, once tentative, had blossomed into something real, something Ava had never dared to hope for. But despite the progress, Ava knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The staff still eyed her with suspicion, the whispers still lingered in the halls, and her position in the household, though more secure now, felt fragile. The change was palpable, but it was a change she wasn't sure she was ready for. One afternoon, while Ava was sitting in the garden, quietly observing Michael as he played, she felt a presence beside her. She turned to find Mr. Sinclair standing there, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes on the horizon. Ava, he said, his voice thoughtful. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately. Ava felt her stomach tighten, unsure of what to expect. What about, sir? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his expression serious but softened by something deeper. About this, he gestured between them. About Michael. About what we've built together. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that what they had was fragile, but hearing him speak like this made her realize just how much was at stake. I don't know where this is going, Ava, he continued, his voice a bit more strained. But I want to be honest with you. I know things have been complicated. You've been a huge part of Michael's growth, and I don't want that to end. Ava looked at him, her heart racing. I understand, sir, she said softly, but I've always known my place. Here, I never expected to be a permanent part of your lives. I just wanted to help him. Mr. Sinclair's eyes softened, and he took a deep breath. I know, he said quietly, but you're more than that now. You've become someone Michael relies on, and I can't ignore that. Ava felt a strange sense of relief flood through her. You've made a huge difference in his life, Mr. Sinclair said, stepping closer. And I want to make sure that you don't feel like you're an outsider anymore. Ava's throat tightened as she processed his words. I don't want to cause any trouble, she said quietly. I just want what's best for Michael. Mr. Sinclair gave a small, understanding nod. And I want the same, he said. But it's time we move forward. We need to make sure that Michael has a stable future, one that includes both of us, not just the lessons you've been teaching him. Ava felt a pang of sadness. She had always known that she couldn't stay in the shadows forever, but hearing Mr. Sinclair say it aloud felt like a finality. What do you mean, sir? She asked, her voice soft. I'm offering you something, Ava, he said. A chance to be part of this family, truly. I want you to stay, to be a permanent part of Michael's life. But I also need you to understand that things can't stay the way they are. We need to be open about your role here. I can't keep hiding it. Ava's mind raced. She had never imagined this scenario, where she would be forced to choose between her place in the family and the quiet life she had built with Michael. I don't want to be a problem, she said, her voice breaking. Mr. Sinclair reached out and gently touched her arm. "You're not a problem, Ava," he said, his voice sincere. "But I can't keep you in the shadows. It's time to let everyone know who you really are." Ava felt a mixture of emotions, fear, relief, and uncertainty. She had never asked for anything more than what she had, but now it seemed like everything was changing. "But what about the staff?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about how they see me?" Mr. Sinclair gave her a reassuring smile. "I'll handle that," he said firmly. "I'll make it clear that you're not just the maid. You've done more for Michael than anyone else, and that means something. We'll make sure everyone understands that." Ava nodded, but her mind was still spinning. "I don't know what this means for me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know what my place is in all of this." Mr. Sinclair looked at her with a soft, understanding gaze. "You have a place, Ava," he said gently. "You always have, and I want you to know that you're important. Not just to Michael, but to me as well." Ava felt her chest tighten with emotion, but she didn't say anything. She wasn't sure what to say. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't alone. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. Mr. Sinclair took a step back, his expression thoughtful. "We move forward," he said. "Together. As a family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ava looked at him, unsure of what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, and there would still be moments of doubt. But at least now, she wasn't walking it alone. As they stood there, in the fading light of the evening, Ava realized that she had something she had never allowed herself to believe in, a future. A future with Michael. A future with a family. And maybe, just maybe, a future with herself at the heart of it all. The days following their conversation were filled with an uncomfortable, yet necessary sense of change. Ava had always known the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now, with Mr. Sinclair's promise to make things right, a new chapter began to unfold. The atmosphere in the household had shifted. Michael continued to flourish under the new dynamic, and while Ava remained cautious about the future, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the first time in a long while. Mr. Sinclair's support for her was palpable now, and the staff, though still watchful, no longer whispered with the same judgment. But the challenge was far from over. Ava could feel the weight of their newfound openness, the pressure to maintain the balance that had been so carefully established. She had done what she believed was right by Michael, but now she was faced with the delicate task of ensuring that everything would continue without drawing the wrong kind of attention. That evening, as Ava helped Michael with his reading, the sense of peace she had been feeling was disrupted by a sudden knock on the door. Michael looked up, his eyes wide with excitement as he always did when someone visited. Ava stood and walked to the door, half expecting it to be one of the other staff members, or perhaps even Mr. Sinclair. But when she opened it, she was met by a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and his presence immediately put her on edge. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but confident. "Is Mr. Sinclair available? I need to speak with him." Ava hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She had never seen this man before, and his sudden appearance made her uneasy. "I'm afraid he's not in right now," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I help you?" The man's eyes scanned her face for a brief moment before he spoke again, his tone becoming more insistent. "I'm from a legal firm. We've been hired to review the Sinclair estate, and I need to speak with Mr. Sinclair personally." Ava's stomach tightened. She didn't know why, but something about the man's presence felt off. "I'll let him know you're here," she said, stepping aside to let him into the hallway. She closed the door behind her, her mind swirling with questions. Why had a legal firm been sent to the house? And why hadn't Mr. Sinclair mentioned anything about it? Her pulse quickened, a sense of dread settling over her as she walked toward the study. When she entered, she found Mr. Sinclair sitting at his desk, reviewing some papers. He looked up as she approached, his expression briefly clouded with concern. "Ava, what's wrong?" he asked. "There's a man here to see you," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "He says he's from a legal firm and needs to speak with you." Mr. Sinclair's face instantly hardened. He set down the papers in front of him and stood up, a frown creasing his brow. "I wasn't expecting anyone," he said, his voice sharp. "Where is he?" Ava led him down the hallway to where the man was waiting, standing stiffly by the wall. As soon as he saw Mr. Sinclair, the man's demeanor shifted. He straightened up, his face going from neutral to calculating in an instant. "Mr. Sinclair," he said with a tight smile, offering his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Mr. Sinclair shook his hand, but didn't return the smile. "What's this about?" he asked. The man's eyes flicked briefly to Ava, who stood just behind Mr. Sinclair, before speaking again. "We've been hired to perform a review of the Sinclair estate, including the family's personal assets," he said. "We'll need to meet with you to discuss the specifics. It's standard procedure for the ongoing preparations." Mr. Sinclair's jaw tightened, and Ava could see the tension building in his posture. She knew there was more to this than the man was letting on. "I wasn't aware of any such preparations," Mr. Sinclair said coldly. "You'll have to explain this to me more thoroughly." The man seemed undeterred, his smile never wavering. "Of course, we've been asked to ensure that everything is in order, especially with regard to future plans and any legal matters that may arise," he said smoothly. "I'm sure you understand. We'll need to schedule a time to go over the details, preferably within the next few days." Mr. Sinclair's eyes narrowed. "I'll be in touch," he said firmly. The man gave a slight bow before turning to leave, casting one last, lingering look at Ava as he passed her. As soon as the door closed behind him, Mr. Sinclair turned to Ava, his expression dark. "I didn't expect this," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "This complicates things." Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been so focused on the progress they had made with Michael that she hadn't even considered the possibility of outside interference, of someone from the world Mr. Sinclair had kept so closely guarded coming in and shaking things up. "What do we do now?" Ava asked, her voice shaky. Mr. Sinclair paused for a moment before answering. "We do what we've always done," he said, his voice firm but laced with uncertainty. "We protect Michael. I'll make sure this doesn't interfere with his future." But Ava could tell that the certainty in his voice was a facade. She knew, deep down, that this new development, whoever had sent the legal team, would only add to the pressure that was already building. Things were about to change again. The walls that had started to crack would likely break wide open, and it was impossible to tell what that would mean for Michael, for Mr. Sinclair, or for her. But Ava had made a promise to herself and to Michael. She would stand by him, no matter what came next. Whatever the world outside might throw at them, she would face it with him, and they would continue to move forward. Together. The days that followed the unexpected arrival of the legal team were filled with a quiet kind of tension. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, that the calm they had worked so hard to create was slowly slipping through their fingers. Mr. Sinclair had been distant since the meeting, his usual confident demeanor replaced with a quiet anxiety that he couldn't quite hide. Ava did her best to focus on Michael, continuing their lessons with the same care and attention. Michael's progress had been incredible, and every time he looked up at her with those bright, eager eyes, Ava knew that it had been worth it. Every moment, every challenge, every doubt. But despite the warmth of their connection, Ava couldn't ignore the growing distance between her and Mr. Sinclair. The promises he had made to her were still hanging in the air, unspoken but understood, and she wondered how long they could keep living in this delicate balance. The staff was still watching, still whispering behind closed doors, and Ava knew that their secret wouldn't remain hidden for long. It was only a matter of time before the truth would come crashing down, and when it did, she wasn't sure what would be left standing. One evening, after dinner, Ava found herself in the garden, the cool night air helping to clear her mind. She had been thinking about the conversation with Mr. Sinclair and the uneasy feeling that had settled in her chest. She didn't know what had happened with the legal team, but she knew that whatever it was only the beginning of something more complicated. As she walked along the garden path, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find Mr. Sinclair walking toward her, his expression serious. He had always been a man of few words. But tonight, there was something else in his eyes, something that made Ava's heart race. "Ava," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." Ava's stomach tightened. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had come, she wasn't sure how to feel. "Of course," she replied, her voice steady despite the growing anxiety. They walked toward a quiet bench in the garden, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze the only sound around them. When they sat down, Mr. Sinclair didn't speak right away. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Ava waited patiently, unsure of what to expect. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes dark and heavy with something she couldn't quite place. "I've made a decision," he said quietly. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had feared this moment, knowing that things were about to change, but she wasn't prepared for what he was about to say. "I'm moving forward with the legal review," he continued, his voice steady but filled with an edge she hadn't expected. "The estate needs to be properly managed, and I have to make sure that everything is in order. This is bigger than just us now, Ava." Ava's mind raced. She had known the legal team's involvement would complicate things, but hearing him speak so formally about it made everything feel so much more real. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Sinclair looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "It means that we're going to have to be transparent," he said slowly. "I can't keep hiding the truth about Michael, about you, about everything that's happened here. The staff will need to know the full story." Ava felt her stomach drop. The secret they had kept for so long was no longer something they could protect. She had always known that the truth would come out eventually, but now, hearing Mr. Sinclair say it so plainly, it felt like a door had been opened that they could never close. "You want to tell them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Sinclair nodded. "It's the only way forward," he said. "I've been hiding from the truth for too long, trying to protect something that isn't real. But I can't keep doing that. Not if we want Michael to have the future he deserves." Ava sat silently, her mind whirling. The thought of everything being exposed, of the world knowing about her role in Michael's life, terrified her. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, never wanted to draw more eyes on her than necessary. But now, it seemed like there was no other option. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll talk to the staff," Mr. Sinclair said, his voice firm. "I'll explain everything. I'll make it clear that you're part of this family now, that you've done more for Michael than anyone else. I won't let anyone undermine that." Ava nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. She knew that no matter how Mr. Sinclair presented it, the staff's opinions wouldn't change overnight. They had always viewed her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. And now, she was about to be thrust into the spotlight in a way she hadn't prepared for. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mr. Sinclair gave her a small smile, his eyes softening. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he said. "For everything you've done for Michael. For everything you've done for me." Ava's chest tightened. She had never expected any of this. Never expected Mr. Sinclair to acknowledge the role she had played in his son's life, let alone ask her to stay in the family. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure if she was ready for the world to know the truth. "I just want what's best for him," she said softly. Mr. Sinclair nodded. "And I want the same," he said. "We'll do this together, Ava. We'll make sure that Michael's future is secure and that we can finally move forward, without any more secrets." Ava looked at him, her heart heavy with both fear and hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like they were heading in the right direction. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. The days that followed their conversation about the legal review were filled with an unsettling calm. Ava could feel the weight of their decision hanging over the household. Mr. Sinclair had promised to take care of things, but she wasn't sure if she believed him. The staff had started to adjust to the new dynamic, though their eyes still lingered on her. She knew the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. But what did it mean for her? For Michael? She wasn't sure. Michael, on the other hand, was doing better than ever. He was more confident, more engaged, his voice filling the house with laughter and curiosity. It was the kind of progress that warmed Ava's heart. She had always believed in him, even when others hadn't. And now, to see him thriving, to see him happy, made all the quiet sacrifices worth it. But even with Michael's newfound joy, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The promise Mr. Sinclair had made to her, to finally allow her to be a true part of the family, had brought a small sense of peace. But it was fragile. The tension still lingered, as did the expectations that came with being part of a world she had never belonged to. It was one of those quiet mornings when she felt the full weight of her uncertainty. She had just finished breakfast with Michael, watching as he eagerly jumped into a new book, when the sound of Mr. Sinclair's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ava, can we talk?" Ava turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. She nodded and followed him out of the room, her heart beating faster with each step. They walked in silence down the hallway, Mr. Sinclair's shoulders tense, his hands shoved in his pockets. When they reached his study, he opened the door and stepped inside. Ava hesitated for a moment before following him in. "Sit down, Ava," Mr. Sinclair said, his voice softer than usual. Ava obeyed, sitting in the chair across from his desk, waiting for him to speak. He sat down slowly, his fingers resting on the edge of the desk, his eyes meeting hers. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low, "about everything. About you. About Michael. About the future." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what he was about to say, but she knew it would change everything. "What about the future?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mr. Sinclair sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I've realized that I can't keep pretending like nothing has changed," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more for my son than anyone could have ever expected. You've changed his life. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Ava didn't know how to respond to that. She had never expected to hear such praise, and yet here it was, coming from the man who had once been so distant. "But," Mr. Sinclair continued, his voice faltering slightly, "I need to be honest with you. This situation, it's complicated. There's still so much I don't understand. The world, the staff, how we move forward from here. There's so much uncertainty." Ava nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I understand," she said quietly. "I never wanted to make things complicated. I just wanted to help Michael." Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. "I know you did. But I also know that the way things are now, it can't stay like this forever. We can't keep hiding." Ava felt her heart stop. "You mean you want to tell everyone?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Sinclair's gaze hardened. "It's not just about telling them," he said, his voice rising slightly. "It's about making sure we can live in the open. The way we've been living, it's not sustainable. You've done so much for Michael, but you deserve more. You deserve to be seen for who you are, for what you've done." Ava's mind swirled with emotions she couldn't fully process. The idea of coming out into the open, of no longer hiding in the shadows, terrified her. She had worked so hard to stay out of sight, to do her job and care for Michael. But now, Mr. Sinclair was asking her to step into the light, to be seen by everyone. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said softly, her voice breaking. Mr. Sinclair leaned forward, his expression softened with understanding. "I know it's a lot," he said, "but I need to know that you're ready to face what's coming. The staff, the world, they're going to notice. They're going to question us. But if we're going to move forward, we have to be open. We have to face it together." Ava felt her heart sink. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she could handle it. "What happens if they don't accept it?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Mr. Sinclair reached across the desk, placing his hand gently on hers. "We face it. We show them that we're stronger than their judgment. I won't let them tear us apart." Ava felt a surge of emotion at his words. She had spent so many years feeling like she didn't belong, feeling like she was nothing more than a maid in a world she didn't understand. But now, Mr. Sinclair was offering her something more, something she never imagined she could have. "I don't want to be the cause of any more problems," she whispered. "I just want to be there for Michael." Mr. Sinclair smiled at her, his hand still resting gently over hers. "You've already done so much for him," he said. "And now, we'll do it together. We'll make sure he has everything he needs. No more hiding." Ava nodded, the tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt a sense of purpose, of belonging. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was part of something, part of a family. And for Michael, that was all that mattered. The following weeks were filled with anticipation and a quiet undercurrent of tension. After Mr. Sinclair's decision to bring everything into the open, the household began to shift. He had taken steps to ensure that the staff understood the new dynamics and the growing relationship between Ava and Michael. There were still whispers, of course, but they were no longer filled with judgment. Instead, they seemed to be more of a curiosity, a hesitance to fully embrace what had changed. Ava, however, couldn't help but feel that she was still on the edge, always just outside of the family's true center. She had worked so hard for this moment, so hard to help Michael, to get him to the place where he felt seen and heard. But now, with everything laid bare, Ava was forced to face the reality of her position. She wasn't just teaching Michael anymore. She was part of a complicated web, a web where every step she took had consequences not just for her, but for the entire family. Michael continued to grow, his confidence blooming. Every day, he seemed more and more like the boy he was always meant to be. He laughed freely, shared his thoughts more openly, and found joy in the small things that once seemed too difficult for him to engage with. Ava's heart swelled every time she saw him take a new step forward. But even as Michael blossomed, Ava couldn't escape the feeling that the world around her was still watching. The staff had begun to treat her with more deference, more respect, but the walls between them still felt high. She knew they saw her, but they didn't truly see her. She wasn't their equal, and she never would be. But as she spent more time with Michael, she realized that was okay. She had a place in his life, and that was enough. One evening, as Ava was sitting in the living room, watching Michael play with some new toys Mr. Sinclair had bought for him, she heard the sound of the front door opening. It was later than usual for Mr. Sinclair to be home, and Ava's mind immediately went to the recent legal issues they had been navigating. She stood up, quietly walking toward the hallway to greet him. But as she reached the door to the study, she heard voices. She stopped in her tracks, listening carefully. Mr. Sinclair's voice was raised in a way she rarely heard. "This isn't just about our family," he was saying. "This is about everything I've worked for. The estate, the reputation, the future." Ava's heart clenched. It wasn't often that Mr. Sinclair opened up about his fears, and hearing him speak like this made her realize just how much was at stake. But the most important thing is Michael. Came a voice she didn't recognize. It was calm but firm. "You need to think about what's best for him." Ava felt a sharp pang in her chest. It was clear that Mr. Sinclair's world, his empire, was in danger. The pressure of the legal review, of the scrutiny on his family, was weighing on him more than she had realized. She knew how much he loved Michael, but she also knew how much he valued his position in the world. She couldn't help but wonder, was Michael's happiness worth it to him? She stayed silent, not wanting to intrude, but feeling helpless as the conversation continued. "I know what's at stake," Mr. Sinclair said, his voice strained. "But I don't know if I can keep both things together. The legal stuff, the business. Michael, it's all becoming too much." Ava's heart sank. She had always known that Mr. Sinclair was under immense pressure, but hearing him admit it was something else entirely. "You have to make a choice," the voice responded, more firm now. "Michael's future is at risk, and you're putting him in the middle of your battles." The words hit Ava like a punch to the gut. She knew how much Mr. Sinclair loved his son, but could he really put everything else aside for Michael? Or would the weight of his world outside the family be too much? Ava stepped away from the door, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to hear anymore, didn't want to know what was going on behind closed doors. But at the same time, she knew it was important. She had to understand the choices Mr. Sinclair was facing. After a few moments, she heard the door to the study open, and Mr. Sinclair walked out, his face a mask of frustration. He didn't see Ava standing there, and for a moment, she considered slipping away. But before she could move, Mr. Sinclair turned and saw her. "Ava," he said, his voice softening. "I didn't mean for you to overhear that." Ava gave a small nod. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady. "I just want to know that Michael is okay." Mr. Sinclair's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. "He's more than okay," he said quietly. "He's doing better than I ever thought possible. And that's because of you." Ava felt a warm flush spread through her chest at his words. It wasn't often that Mr. Sinclair expressed his gratitude, and hearing it now, after everything they had been through, meant more than she could say. "I just want to make sure that nothing changes," she said softly. "For him. For you." Mr. Sinclair looked at her, his eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before, vulnerability, uncertainty. "I don't know if I can guarantee that, Ava," he said quietly. "I want to protect Michael, but there are so many things pulling at me. The business, the estate, the legacy." His voice trailed off, and Ava could see the weight of the world in his eyes. She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "We'll get through this," she said softly. "Together." Mr. Sinclair's gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, he gave her a genuine, relieved smile. "Together," he echoed. As Ava looked at him, she realized that despite the challenges ahead, despite the uncertainty of what the future might hold, they were no longer alone. They had each other. And that, she thought, was the most important thing of all. Weeks passed since the conversation in the study, and the Sinclair household began to settle into a new rhythm. The promise Mr. Sinclair had made to Ava seemed to hold. He kept his word, ensuring that Michael's world was filled with stability and love. Michael's growth was undeniable. The once quiet, reserved boy now spoke openly, engaged in conversations, and smiled with a confidence that had been absent for so long. But more importantly, Michael had found a father in Mr. Sinclair. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen, truly loved. Ava watched from the sidelines, a quiet observer, but also a quiet participant in this newfound connection. As time passed, the tension that once hung in the air began to dissipate. The staff had grown accustomed to the changes, and though there were still moments of uncertainty, the whispers had largely ceased. Ava, too, had started to feel more at ease, though she still carried with her the knowledge that things were never as simple as they seemed. She had done what she set out to do, help Michael, given the chance to learn and grow. But now, it was clear to her that she had done something even more profound. She had become a part of this family, not just as an employee, but as someone who mattered. But with that realization came the challenge of what to do next. She had always known her place, and now she was learning to navigate the blurred lines between being a caretaker and being a member of the Sinclair family. One afternoon, as Ava sat in the garden, watching Michael play with the new toys Mr. Sinclair had bought for him, she felt a quiet sense of contentment wash over her. She knew the future wasn't guaranteed, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Michael was happy. Mr. Sinclair was trying, truly trying, and for her, that was enough. But life had a way of shifting even the most peaceful of moments. As she sat, lost in thought, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Mr. Sinclair walking toward her, his expression calm. But there was something in his eyes that made her heart beat a little faster. He stopped in front of her, his gaze lingering on her face before he spoke. "Ava," he said softly, "I've been thinking." Ava looked up at him, her heart full of the quiet understanding that had formed between them. "About what?" she asked, her voice gentle. "About everything," he said, his tone reflecting the weight of his words. "About Michael, about you, about us." Ava felt a lump form in her throat. She had known this conversation would come, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. "I know things haven't been easy," Mr. Sinclair continued. "I've asked a lot of you, and I don't always know the right way to handle it all. But I want you to know that I don't take any of it for granted." Ava swallowed, her voice trembling. "I never expected anything in return," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help him." Mr. Sinclair stepped closer, his gaze softening. "I know," he said, "and I want you to know that I see what you've done. I see what you've given to him and to me." Ava felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had always kept her distance, had always kept her role clear, but now, standing here with Mr. Sinclair, she realized how much everything had changed. He wasn't just the employer she had served for years. He wasn't just the distant father she had helped from the sidelines. He was someone who had come to understand the depth of her commitment, the love she had for his son. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," he said after a moment of silence. "About what comes next for all of us. And I want you to know that you're a part of it. You've always been a part of it." Ava looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Sinclair gave a small, reassuring smile. "I mean that this family, this life that we're building, wouldn't be the same without you. You've made all the difference, Ava, and I want you to stay." Ava's heart raced. She had never expected him to say those words, had never imagined that her place in their lives could go beyond her work as Michael's caretaker. She had always thought of herself as an outsider, someone who would always be on the periphery. But now, with Mr. Sinclair's words, she was beginning to understand. She had found a home. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he continued, his voice growing softer. "But I'm trying to make it right. I want Michael to have everything he needs, and that means making sure we're all in this together. I need you, Ava, not just for Michael, but for me, too." Ava didn't know how to respond. She had never expected this, never thought she would be asked to stay as part of the family. She had always been ready to leave, ready to step back into the shadows, but now, for the first time, she realized that she didn't have to. She could stay. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Mr. Sinclair smiled again, a little more warmly this time. "You don't have to say anything, Ava," he said. "You've already done enough. You've been everything Michael needed, and you've been everything I didn't know I was missing." Ava felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel everything. The relief, the gratitude, the joy. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found a family, a place where she truly belonged. "I'll stay," she said softly, her voice steady. Mr. Sinclair's smile deepened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We'll do this together, as a family." And as Ava stood there, in that moment, she knew that despite the challenges that lay ahead, they would face them together. Michael had found his father. Mr. Sinclair had found his son, and Ava had found her place. Together, they would move forward, stronger than ever. In this powerful journey of growth and transformation, a maid's quiet dedication to a young boy changes the course of his life, and hers. As she helps him find his voice and build his confidence, she finds herself drawn deeper into a complex web of family dynamics, legal pressures, and unspoken bonds. As their relationship deepens, the tension builds between what is expected of her and the deep connection she has formed with Michael, the child she has grown to love. As secrets begin to surface, they must all confront the reality of their situation, and Ava must make difficult decisions about her place in this family. With emotions running high and trust tested, this heartfelt story of a maid and her charge is a true testament to the power of human connection, compassion, and the will to create a better future. Explore these Black stories of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimate redemption that bring light to the darkest corners of their lives. Discover how Ava's unshakable belief in Michael reshapes her life and the life of the family she serves, all while facing the challenges of being part of a world that doesn't fully accept her. In the end, the journey leads them to a place of healing, understanding, and hope, where each character finds their true place in the world. These Black stories remind us of the profound impact one person can have on another's life and the transformative power of love and dedication.